Hello, Lisa.
Well, hey, Nate. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. And all the energy today.
All the energy, all the coffee.
Well, that's good. I'm gonna go get a cup after this. Well, today's topic I thought was a good one because it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. I know it's been something that you've dealt with as well, which is tolerating behavior, both from yourself and I think from other people, and then basically how that corresponds into lowering expectations once you start to tolerate. And so this has been something that actually came out of some personal conversations that I had had, some people close to you and I actually. And in addition to that, it deals with, I think, people's understanding of framing conversations maybe in the right way when when you stop tolerating behavior, you're not necessarily going after people, but being able to talk with them about, hey, here's some things that you're either saying or you're doing. They're not matching what our company culture is. They're not matching what my expectations are in terms of your own deliverables or even to yourself, right? Like, hey, I let myself down. My integrity wasn't there. I wasn't aware of this, or I didn't plan accordingly, and being able to have kind of realistic conversations both with yourself and with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a hard space to navigate. And I think not only how to frame those conversations and be realistic about where you are and what you're doing in your own life. And then recognizing too, I think what people don't often talk about is when you set the standards, how that actually affects other relationships, both positively and negatively. And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, that's the question. And I think that's what plagues a lot of people, myself included in this, because when you start to force yourself into those conversations, right? There's no growth in the comfort zone. And when it's not comfortable, when you're just starting out and you're saying, hey, I actually need to build some articulation behind my communication. I really need to be able to understand and tell people what's going on. Number one, internally, why this doesn't sit well with me. Number two, how this impacts your relationship with them or even yourself. And then thirdly, like how that impacts the greater environment, that the resulting what if precludes, I think, a lot of people from doing that. And that's how we end up getting in this position where we're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, so I'm not going to bring it up, right? Or I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to ignore it for now. And that ends up hurting people in the long run. And I think that's the biggest question mark for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so too. And if you think about your interactions with other people, you operate with an assumption that what you see is what you get. And so when you are not true with where your standards are and where the bar is set, people operate differently with you or have a relationship that's different from what is actually your true self. And that creates a false relationship. And the more that you do that and the longer that it goes on, the more trust that's going to be broken when they finally realize that you've kind of been pacifying
Mhm.
where they're at versus if you would have just said 6 months or a year prior and say, hey, this is where I'm at now. This is what I'm working towards. Here's what I need from you in order for us to have a relationship that's built on trust and positive mutual forward movement.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you feel, number one, that you've been able to master this yet? And number two, do you feel, if so, or at least if you made progress, it was better served working on yourself first and then communicating with other people, or doing both maybe in parallel? How did you kind of approach that?
So one, absolutely not have I mastered this. And I think that's because it's not a one size fits all, right? There's different standards and different relationships that have differing levels of meaning to you. And it's easier to set your standards and hold a line for relationships that maybe you aren't as invested in versus maybe say standards that you want to draw a line with your spouse. So I think that's one where so people should recognize that there is kind of this spectrum of ability to navigate, and that's okay. Where I've seen it most effective and probably the best place to start is with the relationships that are easier to define. Perhaps you're a people manager or, it's an acquaintance or an early friendship of here's how I operate and here's what I expect. As you build that muscle of understanding who am I leading by example? Because people will not follow your words, they'll follow your actions. So you have to work on you first, not only what you say, but then be willing to demonstrate and communicate that your actions are following that
Hmm.
for a long enough period of time to then say, hey, I've been doing this and I have noticed this in my life. This is the behavior that I no longer am willing to accept in this relationship. How do we make this work? How can I help you get to where I need you to be?
Yeah. Yeah, which in that piece is not easy. And I would agree. I think working on yourself first is the way to go. Although I will say that I built a lot of this myself in tandem, right? There were just certain things, and I was at a point in my life where it's kind of like I'm not gonna put up with this stuff anymore for various reasons. So I think I kind of forced that. But I would say the slippery slope is real, right? You start making excuses for yourself. Hey, I'm gonna turn my alarm off. I'm not gonna get up today, or I'm gonna skip this workout. It's only one cheat meal. And most people can catch that if it's just one thing that's kind of small. But I think that becomes internal behaviors that's easy for us to justify. However, when it comes to other people, I think that's where it's a more difficult slippery slope. I think if you start to let things go, hey, don't have to put up with this person other than, it's 15 minutes in the morning on a video call, right? And then I can hang up and ignore them, or I don't have to respond to them on a text message, right? But that's still, to your point of that authenticity, there's still that internal voice when you don't stand up for what you believe, when you don't frame things into what you're tolerating, allows that behavior to be exacerbated. It tends to increase in frequency and maybe even in volume, meaning like the situations get bigger and bigger and bigger because somebody simply hasn't been checked. They don't know any better, right? And we've seen this, you and I, in our own personal lives come to a head a couple of times where those behaviors from other people just, they don't fit into our lives anymore. There's nothing wrong with those people, but until we had to have that conversation, they just continued to eat at us, right? And then we would have to have our own conversations behind the scenes, or I would complain to my wife, or whatever it was. But it took a while to get there versus just dealing with it up front and saying, hey, this is the line, right? I can understand where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, this is what I expect in our relationship. I need reciprocation. I need value. I need caring. I need love. And if those things can't be there, it's fine. You're not a bad person, but you don't really have a place in my life anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other part too, even maybe going back to what you were talking about, is starting with yourself first. And I think about it a lot in how I work with people is, if I maybe think, well, I don't really need to respond to this right now, or, well, this doesn't really require, 100% effort. I ask myself if by making that choice to not hold the standard ultimately is going to have a positive effect or a negative effect. Mm-hmm. And I have to be okay holding the line of a standard that I set for myself because I know where I'm headed. And if I choose not to, I'm not leading by example, and I'm actually going to create a ripple effect of negative versus positive, because people watch all the time and they watch for long periods of time before you might even get any recognition. So understand that you're going to have to do and hold that standard for a very, very long time through your actions without anything coming back and any pat on the head that says, great job.
Yeah, this is very, very rare. To get that pat on the back, except for yourself internally, right? It does feel good to say, hey, you handled that the right way. And, to your point, nobody knows who truly is watching. And I think especially in this day and age, we all know social media is super powerful, right? Things stay forever, right? You can't really change opinions on social media, but at the same time, you can reach so many more people. And so it is a blessing and a curse. And I would even argue, just from a spousal or partner or a kid perspective, that's even more important, where you have those people that you surround yourself with. And especially if you hold true to the, we're an amalgam of the 5 people closest to us, right? And so are the people you're dealing with one of those people? Is it a long-term relationship? Are you forced into it in a business environment, or, a friendship or something like that? Or is it just somebody who's passing by in the street and you just want to be a good person, right? So, I think we have to understand who we're dealing with, but understand even in those brief circumstances where maybe it isn't a long-term relationship, there is somebody watching. And I think it's really important to consider that.
Yeah. So one question that I get quite often, and I have not yet mastered the right answer if there is one, so I'll ask you, is how do you navigate relationships either in business or in personal where you don't have the choice to partner? You've already partnered, and perhaps you're not growing at the same rate, or your standards are now going in opposite directions. So the relationship is what it is, and removing them is not, let's say, on the table at that moment in time. How do you not waver on your standard without hurting that relationship and without undermining where you want to go personally?
I'm pretty honest about that. I've had to take my lumps, and that's actually a question I was going to bring up. So I'm glad you asked it. I'm going to actually go a little bit prior to establishing that, where things go sideways in a relationship. And number one, I'm not a person to necessarily blow up relationships right away. Um, I've learned to draw a line in the sand, though, as you know, which is why we can laugh about it. But I think it's really, you have to understand how long you're going to be dealing with that person or that partnership, right? And if it is something long term, you've got to be able to establish your boundaries while simultaneously granting respect back to other people, right? If you have an expectation of people need to respect you and your decisions and your line in the sand, they're going to expect the same thing from you. And so, I've just learned truly, hey, this is where I'm coming from. This is what's rubbing me a little bit wrong. I know we're in this for the long run. Here's my intentions. I don't know if there's a better way for us to communicate. I don't know if you want to see things done a different way. I'm willing to work with you, but here are some things I'm not wavering on. And so I use that as a tactic to kind of almost fall on the sword. Hey, I know I'm pretty difficult to work with sometimes, but here's the reason for that. Or here's some other things that are happening in the background that you might not be aware of. I'm not willing to go over here quite yet. Let's revisit this in a couple of months. And we just did this with somebody else in our circle where a question came up. They wanted something more out of a partnership, and the answer was, "Hey, not right now." Right? It's not a no. I'm not going to cap it. I'm going to give you a little bit of hope. I'm going to give you some success out of it, but I'm going to have to see these things from you for us to consider that. And it really keeps the conversation warm versus just cutting it off at the knees and just saying, "Nope, I don't really care about you." Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've really learned is, sounds silly, but you have to be okay with people calling you names. And you have to, it goes along with the self-belief and the confidence that we champion at Habitual Growth, because it really is important. When you know who you are intrinsically, when you know deep down, here's my intent. I'm a good person. I'm trying to make things work. Hey, this may not fit out, be a fit for us. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you're malicious. Doesn't mean I don't like you. It just means, hey, we're not compatible in whatever capacity it is right now. And you can go ahead and call me all the names under the sun, but that's not going to impact me personally because I know who I am. And that's a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people because I was an endless people pleaser. I hear this all the time from a lot of people, which is you want to be liked. You don't want to ruffle feathers. You don't want to be in a position where people are thinking bad about you and calling you names behind your back, but that's the reality. That's just what people do. And it's when you learn to not take it personally, you can stop having that conversation of what if Lisa calls me a really bad name, and it's like, well, if I care about you, I'm going to call you and we're going to have that conversation. If I don't care about you, then guess what? Like, you're going to go talk to your friends and I'm probably not going to deal with you that often, which is difficult, right? It sounds really easy in practice to do, but it feels like a dig at our internal selves sometimes, especially if you're somebody who prides themselves on longevity in relationships and quality relationships. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the real rub. To me, that's the real juxtaposition. It's, hey, they're saying things about me that aren't true. And this is where I think that tolerating behavior comes in, because if somebody is doing that and you're not standing up for yourself and able to articulate those points, right? And this is just one specific example, but it applies across the board. That's just an acceptance, and it furthers that behavior more versus if you have the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you don't nail it perfectly. And I think that's the other thing is, like, when you start doing this, you have to understand you're going to get knocked up a couple of times. Like, it's not going to feel good. You're going to feel pretty bad, right? You listen to a lot of business owners, or even if you're a manager in some capacity and you have to fire somebody, that's not really fun. That hurts people a lot. And it's no different in these difficult conversations, but at least you build the confidence and the belief in yourself because you're saying, hey, here's my line. Like, this is important to me. I know what type of person I am. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. That then leads, ultimately, it might suck in the moment, but it then leads to a better outcome long term, both for yourself and for the person or the partner that you're dealing with. Yes, you are. Get out there. Sweet.